After a long drive, we made a brief stop at Stagshaw Gardens. The gardens were donated to the National Trust by one of its members. We did a short hike, but the shrubs were past their prime. We were early to our next reservation, so we drove to Ray Castle. The castle was built in 1840 by a surgeon from Liverpool. One of its later owners was instrumental in creating the National Trust of England. Beatrix Potter vacationed at the castle with her parents when she was a teenager. The castle was donated to the National Trust in 1929. Returning to Ambleside, we checked into our room and rested until dinner. We walked into town and ate near the Bridge House. After a very good breakfast, we walked to the pier at Ambleside and bought tickets for the boat ride to Bowness on Lake Windermere. The walk from our room to the pier was about a mile, so we did not mind waiting for the boat to arrive. We were glad not to be driving today and relaxed as we listened to the captain's narration on the way to Bowness. After our arrival in Bowness, Vicky did some shopping as we strolled the dock area, which was crowded with tourists. We found a lovely spot overlooking the lake to enjoy a sack lunch we had made at the B&B we were staying at. We then returned to the dock and boarded the boat back to Ambleside. There was a shuttle service that went from the dock area in Ambleside back into town, so rather than walk, we took it. After resting in our room during the afternoon, we walked into town for dinner and bought some ice cream to take back to our room. We drove the short distance to Grasmere this morning. Grasmere is known for its association with William Wordsworth. He lived in Dove College with his family, and it is here that he wrote many of his poems. He is buried at St. Oswald's Church along the banks of the Rothay River. The town has created a daffodil garden in his honor near his grave. Grasmere is also the home to Sarah's Gingerbread Shop, which is housed in an old schoolhouse built in 1630. Sarah Nelson started making this gingerbread in 1854, and the shop is still run by her descendants. We took a stroll back to the car along the Rothay River Walk. We made a stop at Sizerth Gardens, which has been the home of the Strickland family for 750 years. We enjoyed walking through the beautifully landscaped gardens. We also toured the house, which contains some unique furniture. We stopped at Devil's Bridge, which spans the Loon River. It was built around 1370. Local legend says that the devil appeared to a woman who could not retrieve her cow on the other side of the river. The devil offered to build her a bridge for the soul of the first one to cross the bridge. The woman agreed, but outsmarted the devil by sending her dog across the bridge first. There were many people swimming in the river below the bridge. We continued our drive into the Yorkshire Dales and arrived at our next hotel, the Old Stone Trough. We drove several one-track roads to Broughton Hall, but could not enter the private property. In the TV show, this is the home of Mrs. Pumphrey, who has the very spoilt dog named Tricky Woo. Our next stop was the Redmire Village Green in Leyburn, where James picks up his parents at the bus stop. The Falcon Inn is located in the village of Arncliffe. We drove through some beautiful countryside to locate Helen's Farm, which is actually the Yockenwaite Farm in Langstrathdale. Holy Trinity Church, located in Low Lane, was the scene of the wedding. But the main setting for the TV show was in the village of Grassington. We arrived there the day after they were filming, and the crew was restoring the village to its normal appearance. We located the many buildings used in filming and had a light lunch off the main square. We then drove back to the hotel for the night. We ate breakfast in the dining room of the Old Stone Trough before heading off to the cathedral in Ripon. Vicky has several ancestors associated with the city of Ripon. We were not able to visit here on our previous trips, so we made sure to visit this time. However, we could find no information on John de Ripon or any of her other ancestors, but we did enjoy walking through the cathedral. St. Wilfrid built the first church on this site in 672. The original crypt still exists, which makes it the oldest structure in any cathedral in England. Edred the Great destroyed this original church in 948, but a second church was constructed in the 10th century. This church was destroyed by William the Conqueror in 1069. The current church was built in 1180, and the west front with the two towers was completed in 1233. Parts of the roof have collapsed twice, and the cathedral was damaged by Cromwell's forces in the Civil Wars, but major restoration work was done in the 1800s. Lewis Carroll's father worked in the cathedral, and some of the fanciful characters you find in Alice in Wonderland may have been inspired by the fanciful figures carved in the choir. Rievaulx Abbey, founded in 1132, was the first Cistercian abbey to be established in the north of England. Situated in the rich farmland of the River Rye, it quickly became one of the most powerful and spiritually renowned centers of monasticism in Britain. It reached its peak in the 1160s under the leadership of Abbot Alred, but his extensive building program placed a strain on the abbey's financial situation. The monastery was suppressed by Henry VIII in 1538, but the spectacular ruins became a popular destination for the Romantic artists of the 18th and 19th centuries. We spent quite some time wandering through its ruins, which almost equaled the beauty of Fountains Abbey. Leaving the Abbey, we drove to the Holiday Inn. After repeated Viking raids, monks from Lindisfarne carried the remains of St. Cuthbert to the present site of Durham in 995. A white stone church was erected in 998 to house his remains. The foundation for the current cathedral was laid in 1093 with the purpose of housing the remains of St. Cuthbert and the Venerable Bede, who had died in 735. Upon entering the cathedral, you enter the nave, supported by pillars that are 22 feet round and 22 feet tall. The nave's vaulted ceiling is 72 feet overhead and extends for some 492 feet. The central tower is 244 feet tall and can be climbed by 325 steps to get views of the city. It houses 10 bells, which are rung by volunteers. The Galilee Chapel was constructed in 1170 and houses the remains of the Venerable Bede. The shrine of St. Cuthbert sits behind the choir and contains his remains under a slab in the floor. The Chapel of the Nine Altars was completed in the 13th century and is located at the eastern end of the cathedral. The choir is one of the oldest parts of the cathedral. Monks gathered here 7 times a day to pray. It is used daily by church officials as a place of worship near the high altar. Crook Hall dates from the 13th century and has had several owners. The gardens are the primary work of the Bell family, who owned the estate from 1995 until 2022, when they had to liquidate the property due to COVID-19 related issues. It is now owned and operated by the National Trust. The gardens are magnificent and a pleasure to visit.
We will travel 81 miles today, stopping at the Piercebridge Roman Bridge, Barnard Castle, Eaglestone Abbey, Richmond Castle, and Easby Abbey before returning to Middlesbrough. Vicky stayed in the car, while I climbed over a fence, and walked about a quarter of a mile along the River Tees, to the remains of the bridge. As you can see, very little remains of the bridge today. However, in 90 AD, when the bridge was built, the bridge spanned more than 400 feet over the River Tees and carried heavy traffic along Deer Street. Barnard Castle was begun soon after 1093 on a dramatic site above the River Tees. The castle was built to control a river crossing between Durham and Richmond. Much of the present castle was built during the 12th and early 13th centuries by the Balliol family. The clifftop inner ward shows the remains of fine domestic buildings, including a magnificent round tower built around 1200. From the 14th century onwards, the castle belonged to the Earls of Warwick. From 1471 to 1485, the Duke of Gloucester owned the castle. He later was crowned Richard III. After a fierce siege in 1569, when the castle was bombarded by rebels, the castle went into steep decline and was effectively abandoned in the early 17th century. It is still an imposing piece of property today. Eaglestone Abbey is situated above a bend in the River Tees. Founded between 1195 and 1198, Eaglestone was one of the poorest in England. The tomb of Sir Ralph Bowes, who died in 1482, is located in the church crossing. After the dissolution of the monasteries, the site was granted to Robert Strelley in 1548 and he converted the abbey into a private home. The most notable feature of the ruins is the paned arch window on the northeast wall. While small compared to some of the other abbeys, these remains are a pleasure to stroll through. Richmond was crowded with tourists and market-goers. We had difficulty finding a parking spot, but finally settled on one about a half-mile walk from the castle. The castle is the best preserved example of an early Norman castle in England. Probably begun in the 1070s by Alan Rufus, who may have fought at the Battle of Hastings, the castle was expanded in the 12th century by his great-nephew Conan, who built the keep, which is the major feature of the ruins today. But by 1540, the castle was derelict and became a popular tourist destination. During the First World War, the castle housed conscientious objectors. Near to Richmond are the ruins of Easby Abbey. The impressive ruins lie in the valley of the River Swale in North Yorkshire. Easby is one of the best preserved monasteries of the White Canons. Remains of the refectory, gatehouse, and monk's dormitory can still be seen. Founded in 1152, Easby was suppressed in 1536 and quickly fell into ruin. J.M.W. Turner used Easby as a subject many times in his landscape paintings.
We drove north to the town of Jarrow to visit St. Paul's Church and Monastery. Upon our arrival, a volunteer offered a cup of instant coffee. This used to be a pilgrimage site but probably gets few visitors. The land was donated by King Edgefrith of Northumbria in 681. The Venerable Bede came to this monastery when he was just 7 years old. The Vikings sacked the church in 794 but it was rebuilt in 1074. Leaving Jarrow, we drove to Tynemouth on the coast to visit the priory and castle. The priory and castle sit on a hilltop overlooking the North Sea. This medieval priory was protected by walls, towers, and a gatehouse. Archaeologists have found remains of Iron Age habitation on this headland. We know the priory existed in the 8th century because Venerable Bede wrote of the death of an abbot from Tynemouth. There are several graves marked by stone slabs and a cemetery adjacent to the priory. There is a Coast Guard station nearby also. We saw a statue of Admiral Collingsworth who took command at Trafalgar when Lord Nelson was killed. We enjoyed a picnic in the shadow of the priory's ruins. We returned to Middlesbrough and rested before eating dinner at a local pub. We drove about 32 miles in wet weather to the east coast to visit Whitby Abbey. The first monastery on this site was founded in 657 by Abbess Hild. It quickly became one of the most important religious centers in the Anglo-Saxon world. In 664 Whitby hosted a landmark synod that decided to follow the Roman Catholic date for Easter rather than the Celtic date. This was crucial in deciding the direction of the English Church. The monastery was abandoned following Danish raids in the 9th century but the Benedictine monk Rienfrid established a new community on the site in 1078. The ruins we see today were constructed in the 1220s under the leadership of Rienfrid. The monastery was suppressed by Henry VIII in 1539 and left to decay into these ruins. Whitby Abbey has inspired many artists and writers, including Caedmon, the first named poet in the English language, and Bram Stoker, who was inspired after a visit to Whitby to write his novel, Dracula. This was the first day we needed to use our wet weather gear and it turned out to be the last. We were blessed with beautiful weather on this trip. We wanted to stop in Robin Hood's Bay, but the weather was so nasty that it would have been useless, so we continue on down the coast for 22 miles to Scarborough Castle. We avoiding the steep climb to the castle by reserving a parking space inside. The main feature of the castle is the 12th century Great Tower built by Henry II. The castle became one of the greatest royal fortresses and played a prominent role through the Middle Ages. King John visited the castle several times and spent more money enlarging it than any other royal castle. In 1484 Richard III was the last king to have stayed here while assembling a fleet to resist the invasion of Henry VII. As you walk around the castle it is still possible to see how large it would have been in medieval times. We climbed up onto the walls and were rewarded with great views of the city of Scarborough. We could even see some of the medieval walls that surrounded Scarborough. We ended the day by driving 87 miles through heavy rains to our hotel in Doncaster.